The headlights of a passing car illuminated the frost-covered windows of a beat-up sedan parked at the edge of a dimly lit lot. Inside, a young woman cradled her baby, wrapping a worn blanket tightly around him. Her breath hung in the freezing air as she whispered soothing words, though her own voice trembled with exhaustion and worry. Every few seconds, she glanced out the window, her eyes darting toward the gas station across the street, her face etched with fear of being discovered. Unseen from across the parking lot, a man in a sleek black coat stood beside his car, watching. His sharp eyes took in the scene. The makeshift curtains of old shirts covering the windows, the fogged-up glass hinting at the warmth of human breath inside. Something about the woman's hunched shoulders and the faint, muffled cry of the child struck him like a punch to the chest. This wasn't the kind of thing Michael Bennett, the reserve CEO of a nationwide retail chain, expected to encounter after a late-night meeting. But as he stood there in the freezing cold, an unfamiliar resolve stirred within him. He had to know more. Michael Bennett was the kind of man who seemed to have it all. At 48 years old, he stood tall with a commanding presence, his neatly tailored suits and salt and pepper hair exuding an air of success. As the CEO of Horizon Retail Group, he had spent the last 2 decades transforming the struggling chain into a nationwide powerhouse. But for all his accomplishments, Michael had built his empire at a price. His personal life was a hollow echo of his professional success. His days were spent in boardrooms and airports, his evenings consumed by emails and financial reports. A distant divorce and estranged relationships with his 2 grown children left him feeling like a guest in his own life. His employees saw him as an enigmatic figure. He was courteous but detached, a man more likely to talk about profit margins than personal stories. Beneath his polished exterior, however, was a man grappling with questions he could no longer ignore. Lately, Michael had started to feel the weight of his choices pressing down on him, a nagging doubt that whispered, "What's all of this really for?" On this particular winter evening, Michael found himself in an unfamiliar part of town, having just wrapped up a last-minute meeting at one of the company's smaller stores. The neighborhood was a stark contrast to the opulence he was used to. Cracked sidewalks, flickering streetlights, and the occasional shuttered storefront hinted at better days long past. Michael rarely visited stores in person anymore, but he had taken to making these unannounced trips as a way of staying grounded, a half-hearted attempt to reconnect with the people his company served. The meeting had been tense. Shrinking profits and low morale were evident in the tired faces of his employees. One face in particular had caught his attention, a young cashier named Emily Carter. Her uniform was worn, her smile polite but weary, and Michael had noticed the way she clutched her jacket, as though bracing against more than just the cold. She'd stayed late to finish cleaning up, declining help from co-workers with a quiet determination that piqued his curiosity. Now, standing in the freezing parking lot, Michael couldn't shake the memory of Emily's face. As he watched the beat-up car across the lot, recognition struck him like a bolt of lightning. It was her, the same young woman, now clutching a baby in her arms, trying to find solace in a vehicle that looked more like a prison than a home. Michael inhaled sharply, the icy air biting his lungs. This was more than a glimpse into someone else's struggle. It was a mirror reflecting everything he'd been trying to avoid. The soft murmur of the baby's cry echoed through the parking lot, drawing Michael closer, though his feet felt like they were anchored to the ground. He stood frozen for a moment, his breath fogging in front of him as his mind raced. The details of the scene before him were painfully clear: the battered car, the woman holding her child, the faintest hints of desperation in the way she wiped her eyes. He had seen poverty before, saw it daily in his stores, in the rows of discount items, and the tired faces of customers trying to stretch their paychecks. But this was different. This wasn't just a life touched by hardship. This was someone struggling to hold on, her every action weighed down by the harsh reality of survival. Michael's thoughts snapped back to the woman's face, the woman he had seen earlier that evening. Emily. How long had she been living like this? The thought gnawed at him, almost as if it were a personal failure. He had always prided himself on understanding his business, on knowing the lives of his employees, even if only superficially. But this was a new level of uncertainty, one that made him feel small. What had he missed? As the baby's cries grew more insistent, Michael knew he couldn't walk away. There was something in his gut, a pull toward this woman and her child, something that made it impossible to ignore. He had spent so much of his life focusing on the bottom line, but this was a moment that could change everything. A car drove by, briefly casting its headlights on Emily's car, but she didn't seem to notice. She was focused entirely on her baby, murmuring gently to him, trying to soothe him despite her own exhaustion. The contrast between the vulnerability in her actions and the ice-cold world around her was overwhelming. Michael's instincts kicked in. Without fully thinking, he walked toward the car, his heart pounding. Each step felt heavy, his breath coming faster, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Why was he doing this? He didn't even know this woman. And yet, everything inside him urged him forward. Was it empathy? Guilt? Or something deeper? Something he couldn't quite place, but knew he had to act on? He reached the window, knocking softly on the fogged-up glass. Emily looked up, startled, her face tense with a mix of fear and surprise. She quickly wiped her eyes, as if trying to hide the evidence of her struggle. "Are you all right?" Michael asked, his voice uncharacteristically soft. She froze for a moment, her eyes flicking over him, clearly trying to gauge whether he was a threat or someone offering help. It wasn't a question she had likely been asked in a long time. She hesitated before shaking her head slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm fine, just trying to get through the night." But Michael could see the truth in her eyes, the silent admission of just how far from fine she really was. He took a deep breath, his mind spinning with the weight of what he was about to do. This wasn't in the plan. It wasn't even close. But for the first time in years, he felt a pull to do something that mattered beyond the numbers. "I'll help," Michael said before he could second-guess himself. His heart thudded in his chest. This was the moment. Whatever came next, everything in his life was about to change. The decision to help Emily was not an easy one for Michael. As soon as he offered his assistance, the weight of it settled over him like a heavy coat, a constant reminder that his words were more than just an impulse. He was no longer the distant, high-powered CEO of a corporation. He was now a man responsible for the well-being of someone who, until that night, had been a stranger. He didn't know where this path would lead, but he knew he couldn't walk away. Over the next few days, Michael found himself obsessing over Emily's situation. After that initial encounter in the parking lot, he made sure she and her baby were safely settled in a nearby shelter for the night, paying for a temporary stay out of his own pocket. He'd made her promise to reach out to him if she needed anything. Then he left, uncertain about the next step, but feeling a strange sense of urgency. Something about her eyes, the rawness of her struggle, had unsettled him. When Michael returned to the office the next day, he found himself distracted, unable to focus on the usual barrage of meetings and quarterly reports. He found himself staring at the screen of his computer, thinking about Emily, about the cold car, about the baby's fragile cries. How could someone like her, someone working hard just to get by, end up in such a dire situation? And more importantly, what kind of man would he be if he didn't try to make it right? He had to know more, to understand how to help her. But he wasn't sure where to start. His expertise lay in business strategies, not in personal crises. Yet, over the following weeks, he made it a point to check in on Emily. He started by offering her a temporary job in the corporate office, something he could arrange easily. She hesitated at first, skeptical about working with the very man who could have made her life easier by simply offering financial help. But after a lot of convincing, Emily agreed. She needed a way to support herself, and despite the discomfort she felt at working under the watchful eye of the CEO, she knew she had no other option. Their first meeting was awkward, as most things were between them. Michael, despite his wealth of experience in managing people, found himself fumbling for the right words. Emily, on the other hand, was clearly out of her element, her nervousness palpable. "I don't want any special treatment," Emily said quietly, her eyes focused on the desk in front of her. "I'm here to work. I need to prove I can do it. I don't want to be a charity case." Michael nodded, understanding her pride. It was something he respected. "You won't be," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You'll earn it, just like everyone else." As the days passed, Michael's growing bond with Emily began to reshape his view of the world. Her determination in the face of overwhelming hardship was nothing short of inspiring. Despite the weight of her personal life, she showed up to work every day on time, doing everything asked of her with a quiet grace. She cleaned the break room, organized files, and even offered suggestions on improving workflow, things Michael would have never expected from someone in her position. There were moments of tenderness that surprised him. One afternoon, he found himself sitting in his office, his thoughts lost in a sea of numbers, when Emily knocked lightly on his door. He looked up to find her holding a cup of coffee in her hand. "I thought you might like this," she said, her voice steady but warm. It was such a simple gesture, but for some reason, it stopped him in his tracks. For the first time in years, Michael felt like someone cared about him as a person, not just as a boss. And it made him realize how disconnected he had become from the people around him. He had built his empire on the backs of hardworking individuals like Emily, but he had never really seen them, never truly understood the depth of their lives. Now, here he was, sitting in front of a woman who had nothing but a baby and a burning desire to survive, and she had somehow made him feel seen. As the weeks wore on, Michael's involvement in Emily's life grew. He connected her with social services to help her find permanent housing. He worked with her to get the proper health care for her child. He even helped her enroll in classes to finish her high school diploma, something she had put off after having her baby. But nothing came easy. There were setbacks, moments when Emily, despite her progress, began to fall back into old patterns of doubt. One evening, she came to Michael in tears after being turned away from a housing application. "They said I don't have enough of a stable job," she explained, wiping her eyes. "They said they can't guarantee anything until I've been working here longer. But I can't afford to wait that long, Michael. I need to get out of the car. I can't keep doing this." Michael felt his own heart twist. She was so strong, but even the strongest people had their breaking points. This wasn't just about her baby anymore. It was about her own dreams, her dignity, and her future. "I'm not going to let that stop you," he said, his voice unwavering. "We'll figure something out. I'll help." He immediately reached out to contacts in his network, pulling strings to secure her a more permanent position in the company. The months that followed were a blur of determination, setbacks, and progress. Emily's life began to change in ways she never thought possible. And with each small victory, Michael found himself changing too. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something that truly mattered. The stakes were no longer about the company's quarterly profits or expanding the brand. They were about the lives of the people who worked for him, the ones who had been overlooked for too long. One rainy afternoon, Michael sat in a small, modest apartment, one he had helped Emily secure through his own efforts. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The baby was napping, and Emily, for the first time in what seemed like forever, was sitting down to a meal that wasn't eaten in a car or on the run. "I can't believe this is really happening," she said quietly, her eyes glassy with emotion. "I thought I was going to be stuck forever." Michael smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "You're not stuck. You're just getting started." As the days turned into weeks, Michael continued to help Emily and watch her grow. But in the process, something unexpected happened. He began to grow too. His world, once limited to boardrooms and luxury cars, had expanded into the realm of real human connection. Emily had shown him that success wasn't just about numbers, it was about people. And as much as he had been trying to help her, in many ways, she had helped him find a purpose he didn't know he was missing. The smell of fresh coffee and pastries filled the small break room, but Emily's hands trembled as she clutched a folder containing her housing application. Michael had pulled every string he could to ensure she had everything needed, from stable employment verification to recommendations from community advocates. Still, the fear of rejection weighed heavily on her. Michael sat across from her, a rare look of unease in his normally composed expression. He had accompanied her to the office earlier that morning for moral support, but now they waited for the call that would determine whether Emily and her baby could finally leave behind their life of uncertainty. "Are you sure they'll approve it?" Emily asked, her voice small. Michael leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. "I've done everything I can to make sure they do. But no matter what happens, we're not giving up. You've come too far to stop now." Just as Michael finished speaking, Emily's phone rang. Her breath hitched as she stared at the screen, her fingers frozen. "You should answer it," Michael said gently, though his own heart raced. Emily nodded, fumbling to accept the call. She put it on speaker, her voice shaking as she said, "Hello? Hi, Emily. This is Sarah from the housing office," came the cheerful voice on the other end. "I wanted to let you know we've reviewed your application, and—" There was a pause, long enough to make Emily's eyes widen with fear. Michael held his breath, leaning in unconsciously, as if willing the next words to be good news. "You've been approved for the apartment. Congratulations." Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to speak. "Oh my God. I don't know what to say. Thank you. Thank you so much." Michael exhaled, the tension in his shoulders releasing all at once. A smile spread across his face as he watched Emily break down into tears of relief and joy. For the first time in months, she didn't have to worry about where she and her baby would sleep. But as the high of the moment set in, Michael felt a pang of uncertainty creep into his chest. This wasn't the end of the road. There was still so much she had to overcome, so much he had to do to help her succeed. Later that day, after helping Emily move into her modest new apartment, Michael found himself standing in the small, quiet living room. The baby gurgled happily in his playpen, and Emily was in the kitchen unpacking dishes. The space was far from luxurious, but it was safe, warm, and hers. "Michael," Emily said, stepping into the room. She looked at him with a mix of gratitude and vulnerability. "I don't think I can ever thank you enough for everything you've done. You've changed my life." Michael met her gaze, his own emotions threatening to spill over. "You don't owe me anything, Emily. You did this. You fought for this. I just gave you a push." She shook her head. "It was more than a push. You believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself." In that moment, Michael realized this wasn't just about helping Emily. It was about confronting the man he had been. He thought back to all the years he had spent chasing success, oblivious to the people who had fallen through the cracks. Emily and her baby weren't just a story of hardship. They were a call to action, a reminder of the kind of leader he wanted to be. As he left her apartment that evening, Michael looked back at the door, his heart full but heavy. He had faced his greatest challenge, not the corporate struggles or the personal sacrifices, but the decision to step into someone else's life and truly make a difference. And for the first time, he felt like he had finally succeeded in something that truly mattered. Over the next few months, Emily's life transformed in ways she had never thought possible. The small apartment became a sanctuary for her and her baby, a place filled with warmth, safety, and hope. Each morning, she woke up to the sunlight streaming through the windows, no longer wondering how she would make it through the day. The baby, now giggling and crawling across the carpet, was thriving, and for the first time, Emily could breathe without the weight of survival crushing her. Her job at Horizon Retail Group evolved as well. Michael, true to his word, had given her opportunities to grow, not as an act of charity, but because she had proven herself capable. Starting as a temporary administrative assistant, she quickly demonstrated her initiative, offering insights that even the seasoned managers overlooked. Michael began involving her in team meetings and encouraged her to enroll in professional development programs the company offered. Emily poured herself into every opportunity, often staying late to learn new skills and asking endless questions. It wasn't just about improving her career. It was about proving to herself that she could succeed, no matter how far behind life had placed her. Her hard work didn't go unnoticed. Within 6 months, she earned a full-time position in operations, a role that gave her a steady income and the confidence to dream bigger. For Michael, watching Emily's rise was both fulfilling and humbling. It wasn't just her life that had changed. His had too. He no longer viewed his role as CEO through the narrow lens of profits and expansion. Instead, he began to see it as a platform for making real, meaningful change. He started spending more time visiting the stores, talking directly to employees, and listening to their stories. What he found was eye-opening. Emily wasn't an isolated case. Many of his employees were struggling to make ends meet, balancing work with overwhelming personal challenges. Michael decided it was time to act. Drawing from his experience with Emily, he implemented a series of initiatives aimed at supporting his workforce. Horizon Retail introduced emergency financial assistance programs, affordable childcare options, and scholarships for employees who wanted to further their education. Michael also launched a mentorship program, pairing senior staff with junior employees to foster growth and provide guidance. The changes didn't happen overnight, and there were obstacles along the way. Not everyone in the corporate office shared Michael's vision. Some viewed the new programs as unnecessary expenses that didn't align with the company's bottom line. But Michael held firm. He knew that investing in people wasn't just the right thing to do, it was the smart thing to do. One day, during a company-wide town hall meeting, Michael stood at the podium, addressing hundreds of employees in person and thousands more watching via livestream. When I became CEO, I thought success was measured by numbers, sales figures, market growth, profit margins. And while those things matter, they're not what define us, he said, his voice steady but impassioned. What defines us is how we treat each other, how we lift each other up when times are hard. I've learned that success isn't just about what we build, it's about who we build it with. And together, we can make this company a place where everyone has a chance to thrive. The room erupted into applause, and for the first time in years, Michael felt a deep sense of pride, not in himself, but in what they were building together. As for Emily, she continued to flourish. With Michael's mentorship and the support of the programs he had implemented, she gained the confidence to take on more responsibility. Eventually, she became a regional manager, overseeing multiple stores and mentoring employees who, like her, just needed a chance to succeed. One afternoon, as Michael walked through the headquarters, he saw Emily speaking to a group of new hires. She stood tall, her voice clear and confident as she shared her story, not as a sob story, but as proof of what was possible with hard work, determination, and the right support. When she finished, the group broke into applause, and Michael couldn't help but smile. He caught her eye, and she walked over, her face glowing with pride. "Not bad," he said with a grin. She laughed. "Not bad at all. Thank you, Michael, for everything." "You don't need to thank me," he said. "You did this. I just helped you find a path." Later that evening, Michael sat alone in his office, looking out at the city skyline. He thought about the journey he had taken, the risks he had faced, and the lessons he had learned. Helping Emily had started as a single act of kindness, but it had grown into something much larger. It had transformed not only her life, but also his, and the lives of countless others. For years, Michael had chased success, believing it would bring him fulfillment. But it wasn't until he had stepped into someone else's world, shared their burdens, and worked to lift them up that he had found his true purpose. As he turned off the lights and prepared to leave for the night, a sense of peace settled over him. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was a leader, a mentor, and a man who had finally learned what it meant to truly care. And that, he realized, was the greatest success of all. Years later, Emily stood on the stage of a large conference hall, addressing a crowd of aspiring leaders and employees from all walks of life. The room buzzed with energy, filled with people eager to hear her speak. Behind her, a banner displayed the words, "Building Bridges, Empowering Lives Through Leadership and Compassion." She took a deep breath and smiled. "I used to believe that success was out of reach for people like me," she began. "But one act of kindness changed everything. Someone believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. And that belief gave me the courage to fight for a better life. Not just for me, but for my child." The audience listened intently as Emily shared her journey, from living in her car to becoming a regional manager, and now a motivational speaker and advocate for workplace equity. Her story wasn't just about struggle and triumph. It was a testament to the power of connection and the importance of lifting others up. In the crowd, Michael sat quietly, watching her with pride. The company had flourished under his leadership, not just financially, but as a beacon of hope for employees across the nation. Horizon Retail had become a symbol of what was possible when businesses prioritized people over profits. As Emily concluded her speech, the audience rose to their feet in applause. Michael couldn't help but smile. In helping Emily, he had found his purpose. And through her, the ripple effect of compassion and leadership continued to spread, proving that even the smallest acts of kindness could create waves of change. Hope, he realized, was contagious, and they had sparked something that would never fade.